As we get ready to read our book, Things Fall Apart, we want to take a little time and look at some interesting information about the country of Nigeria and the Igbo people who live there. Nigeria is located on the western coast of Africa, and there are many different ethnic groups that live in Nigeria. There are three main languages in Nigeria: Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa. The people group that we will be learning about in Things Fall Apart are called the Igbo, and they are one of the largest ethnic groups in Nigeria. Now, Nigeria is a pretty hot country. Actually, it's very hot. There are two seasons in Nigeria: the dry season and the rainy season. One of the most important natural resources that Nigeria has are its palm trees. We're going to take a look right now at a photojournal of some palm trees. One of the products that comes from palm trees is palm wine. And then there's also another product that comes from palm trees of palm oil. And we're going to take a look at both of those. This is a picture of a 28-year-old palm tree farmer. This farmer has been farming these trees since he was a boy. And in this journal right now, we're going to look at the different ways that he harvests palm oil. Palm oil is used for soap, and it's also used for lots of cuisine or food and cooking in Nigeria and other countries. Here we see a picture of the farmer, and these are the little palm kernels that they harvest from the palm trees. And we're going to see how they take these kernels and they make these kernels into palm oil. The palm kernels grow throughout the year, but the biggest crops are in the wet season between June and October. The neighbors and friends help the farmers break the kernels into lumps, and then they are ripening for 2 days. This is an image of a house in eastern Nigeria. You'll see one of the customs in this state is that when a man's father dies, he must buy a horse and slaughter it. The skull and the tail are then hung in the compound. And this is just the way that they honor the fathers in this particular state. Now we're back to our palm kernels. So they're making palm oil here, and they're going to boil the fatty kernels overnight in a big pot. So they're going to have to boil all night long. You'll notice in this picture that there's a woman that's stepping on this yellow substance right here. After the kernels have been picked and brought home, the women are very involved in making palm oil. They pour the hot boiled palm kernels into a hollowed out log, and then they walk up and down the length of the log. As they add more water, the husks fall off the nut and the juice from the palm kernels is released. The mixture makes some funny kind of sounds. It kind of makes like a burping sound, and it sticks to the feet of the women, and you can see that it starts to stain their feet. Now there are a couple places where there are machines that do this work, but people generally prefer to use their feet because the machines are run by the police, and the police make them pay money to use the machines. So this is the traditional way that they still get palm oil in Nigeria. And this is a picture of the palm oil after it's been squished out of the palm kernels. So the harvest from a handful of trees has taken 2 days or about 48 hours to process. And what's kind of interesting is that that is only going to get about 4 gallons of milk. Oops, not milk, about 4 gallons of oil. And those gallons will sell for about $20. So we're back here with our picture of the women with the palm oil. And this is a picture of some of the seeds from the palm kernels. Now, the seeds are also used, they're roasted and broken open, and inside of the seeds there's another kind of oil. And that's a kind of oil that they use as a medicine. One of the things that they believe that oil prevents is colds and the flu. And this is just a picture of the palm oil being poured into one of the containers for it to be marketed. Now, palm oil is one of the resources that comes from the palm tree, but there's another resource that you're going to read a lot about in Things Fall Apart, and that is palm wine. And we're going to jump over here, and we're going to look at how Nigerians get palm wine from the palm trees. Now, the reason we're going to be spending a lot of time on this is that in Things Fall Apart, this is a drink that is drunk very often when the villagers will gather for important feasts or important meetings. So I want us to have an idea of what it looks like and how it's made. Palm wine is a drink that people drink for ceremonies, for special ceremonies. It's drunk for funerals, for weddings, for family gatherings, and just for special times when people get together. And in this journal, we're going to see a palm wine tapper whose name is Mr. Fay Mann. And Mr. Mann is going to show us how he gets palm wine from the palm trees. So the wine comes from the very top of a palm tree. And the way that Mr. Mann will get to the top of the palm tree is he'll climb the tree using a belt, and he makes this belt from a palm leaf. Now this is kind of cool. He has to make a new belt every 8 days or so. And he's been doing this for 30 years, climbing up the trees and tapping the palm wine from the top of the trees. Here he's showing us what the bark looks like of the palm trees. He's made these funnels so that he can get the wine out of the palm trees. He makes a hole in the trees and the palm wines drip into a bottle. And then he adds a special bark to ferment the wine and stop it from becoming bad. One of the things he has to watch out for is wasps, because the wasps like the taste of the palm wine also. Here Mr. Mann is telling us the story of how when he was 13, his dad first told him to climb a tree to collect wine. And he was really afraid, so his dad lit a fire underneath me at the tree. I had no choice but to climb quickly. I bet he was pretty scared as he climbed that tree because he didn't want the fire to hit his feet. And here we can see a picture of Mr. Mann and his friends at the end of the day enjoying some of the palm wine that they've collected and tapped. Palm trees are all different. Some of them can take 30 days to fill a 2-liter bottle. That's about the size of a large Coke bottle. And other palm trees will take just a week to fill a bottle that size. Farmers have to know their trees very well so that they will know when the bottle will be full. Each community makes their palm wine slightly differently. In Mr. Mann's family, they only collect their wine in the morning, but others go in the evening. And here we see a picture of after they've collected the wine and they're grilling some fish on the fire, and then they'll come and they'll drink the wine together. Now, you will hear this wine referenced a lot in our book, Things Fall Apart, and you'll hear them talking about how the men climb the palm trees. In this culture, only the men are allowed to be palm wine tappers. The women are not allowed to climb the trees as part of this job. We're going to take a look at some other resources and some other cultural items in Nigeria and in the Igbo culture. We already looked at palm wine and learned how they make palm wine. Another very important cultural practice of greeting each other uses a nut called the kola nut. And this is the kola nut. Kola is spelled Kola, and it sounds a lot like our word cola that we use for drinks. The kola nut has a very bitter flavor, and it also has caffeine. So if you chew the kola nut, you're going to get some caffeine. It'll help you wake up. This is probably something Miss Pimentel and Miss Ellerbeck need in the morning. Many West African cultures chew the kola nut, and it's often used in ceremonies. So when there's a special ceremony, the kola nut will be presented to the chief. And when guests come to your home, the polite and proper thing to do is to offer them kola nuts, and they will break the kola nuts and eat the kola nuts with you. In our book, Things Fall Apart, you will see many times when visitors come to each other's homes that they will share kola nuts together. Now, in America, kola nuts are used as a flavoring. And in fact, this might be a kind of surprise for you. It was a surprise for Miss Ellerbeck and me. Coca-Cola, many people think that Coca-Cola used the kola nut as a flavor. So it's very possible that one of the flavors in Coca-Cola came from the kola nut. Now, we don't know because the people at Coca-Cola have kept their recipe a secret. Now we're going to move to the most important crop in Nigeria. Nigeria is the world's largest producer of yams. A yam is kind of like a potato. You'll notice the yams in these pictures are a lot larger than the potatoes that we eat in America. And the main part of the yam plant is called a tuber. And a tuber is a good source of energy. The yams have a really sweet flavor. And there's a couple of ways you can eat it, and we're going to look at a couple of ways you can eat it. First, I want you to see how they grow yams, because in our book, one of the main jobs in the village is growing yams. So here are some farmers who are growing yams in Nigeria. Yams are planted in small mounds. These are kind of like small hills, and there's rows and rows and rows of these small yams. Interestingly, one of the customs in Nigeria is that the wealth of a man when he's getting married used to be measured by how many yams his farm would produce. So if you were a man and you had lots of yams coming from your farm, you were considered a much richer man and wealthier man. Some of the ways that yams are eaten today and in the time of our book, you'll see that they're fried. These are some fried yams here. And then another dish that is very popular is the dish fufu. And fufu is mashed yams. Just looking at these pictures makes me hungry. So we've learned a little bit about some of the crops that are important in Nigeria. We're going to move quickly to another cultural item that we're going to be learning about and hearing about as we read our book, Things Fall Apart. And those are cowries, and we're going to get a picture of some cowries right here. A cowrie is a shell. It's a very small shell. These are lots of these shells, so we say cowries. And cowries were used for money. So instead of having coins or dollars or pesos, they would use shells for their money. So we've looked at some of the natural resources in Nigeria. We've looked at some of the foods that are important in the Igbo culture. We've looked at the money. Now we're going to spend a little bit of time checking out the houses. And these are houses in traditional villages. There are many, many modern cities in Nigeria. What we're going to look at right now are the kinds of houses that the characters in Things Fall Apart would have lived in. So we're going to take a look at the outside of these houses. You'll notice that the Ibu halls, the walls were made out of mud, and women would decorate the walls. They would decorate them with different kinds of decorations like chalk drawings and different things that they would put and draw on the walls. Usually the Ibu homes were circular or rectangular. Here's another circular Igbo house. And if we keep going, we can see this is what in a museum, this is a museum that shows what the inside of an Igbo house may have looked like. You can see the drawings that would have decorated the walls of the house. Now, one of the things, I'm going to jump back here because this is kind of interesting. Inside of the house, most huts had a bedroom for each person. Even the children had their own bedroom. One of the things that's kind of different about the Igbo culture was that in the Igbo culture, the father had his own hut and the wife and children lived in the same hut near the father's hut. So you might have a father's hut and then you might have the house where his wife and children would live. And we'll talk more about that in just a minute. Igbo huts and Igbo houses were in what's called a compound. So here you can see um, the father would have his hut, and then his first wife would have a hut, his second wife would have a hut, and the wives' children would live with them. If a man had more than two wives, then his third wife would have a hut. We'll talk more about their family customs in just a second. I know when we looked at the houses that I mentioned that sometimes a man would have more than one wife. In the Igbo culture, the man or the father was the head of the house. And usually the man would have more than one wife. So this is just a little picture to kind of help us imagine that and how the first and second wife, this just shows the hierarchy or the power within the house. So the father has the most power and the first wife has a little more power than the second wife. And you can see their oldest son of the first wife has more power than the oldest son of the second wife. And so if a man had more than two wives, you can just imagine that there would be another wife here on that diagram. It's just a little picture to help us understand. Now, one of the things that was interesting is that the men in the Igbo culture had what was called titles. So a title was a sign of honor and respect. So for example, if you won a wrestling match and were known as the greatest wrestler in your village, you might have a title of a wrestler. If you were respected by all of the village people, they would give you a title of respect. And the way that you could tell a man's titles were you would look at his ankle, because for each title that he had a bracelet that he would wear around his ankle. So we call that an anklet. And the anklets would help indicate what kind of title he had. So the last part of Igbo culture that we're going to talk about right now is the spirits and just their spirituality. And we'll talk more about this as we keep reading Things Fall Apart. But the Igbo believed that there were living spirits in the world and that these spirits were male spirits and female spirits. And the Igbo people would make sacrifices to the spirits if they were thankful for something that had happened in their life. If they were afraid that they had offended or made the spirits angry, they would often make a sacrifice to the spirit as well. So the Igbo were a very spiritual people. They believed in lots of different spirits. They also believed that each person had his or her own god, which they called chi. And if a person's life was really difficult, they might say, oh, that person has a bad god or that person has a bad chi. And you will hear that reference a lot in our book, Things Fall Apart. So this wraps up what we've been learning just today, just a little bit about the Igbo culture. I hope that you've learned a lot and enjoyed a lot. Make sure that you filled out all your notes on your handout because we're going to be using these as we continue to read this cool book.